some of the things that KMRC can borrow from that experience?
Thank you for that question. So, as you can see from the Malaysian presentation, we actually have a lot of alignments. The critical ones are when you look at their funding or financing model or refinancing model, they have, for example, the securitization, which is something we have not gone to yet. So those are some of our development areas, you know, to be able to purchase mortgages without recourse, which at the moment we don't do. But the other growth areas, obviously, is the diversity of their funding. You know, when you look at the bonds that are issued, apart from the foreign or the foreign currency denominated bonds, they also have sukuks and, you know, innovative bond products of that kind. So those are some of the development areas that certainly KMRC will be looking to go into. And of course, we have the benefit of having Chagamas, you know, my friend, the CEO, Datuk Chung, you know, having been in discussions over a couple of, I think over the last 2 years, they are always with us in comparing notes. We are together in a forum we call International Secondary Mortgage Market Association, which in fact, he was our chairman up to this year. And so we have a lot to learn, and we only look forward to greater engagements with them.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Oltetia. There's one more question I'm seeing online for the Tuk Chung, and the question is, could you please recap, if at all you engage in rent to own, because locally there's been so much focus on home ownership, purchase that is.
Thank you. Well, as far as the rent to own is concerned, we actually were working with the Ministry of Housing and local government in coming up with a scheme. But I think there is a challenge in terms of taking the tail end risk of the property price, because in most rent to own scheme, the financier do not want to be subjected to that.
I think we lost the Tuk Chung. Let's just try and get the signal back, and we shall pick up from where he has left. We're discussing the issue of rent to own. There's a question which came online that locally we have a lot of focus on purchase of homes. What is the Malaysia experience as far as rent to own is concerned? Do we have him back yet? Not yet. Okay, we shall try to see what we can do around getting the Tuk Chung back online. He was responding to questions being raised as far as tenant purchase schemes are concerned, and I think that's an area which was also touched on yesterday, that the Kenyan affordable housing agenda seems to be skewed towards the question of purchase. What are we doing as far as rent to own is concerned? And a number of issues emerged yesterday from our panelists, especially comments coming in from UN Habitat, pointing out that if 80% of persons in houses are on rental basis, why can't we have this as our entry point into trying to find a solution around this question of affordable housing? And that had been a build-up from the question of what is affordability to begin with? Do we benchmark it based on what we are seeing as offtake and demand side of the market? Do we benchmark it based on what we feel the financiers would be able to price as far as taking down the interest rates are concerned? Do we have our guest yet? Let's ask for a minute, so let's give them that. Maybe let's, do we have any other reactions to the issues which have emerged from the Malaysia experience? I know we had already tabled some questions. There was a question around how they structure their financing, coming from the NSC CEO, focusing on the tenor and the regularity of issuances. There was a question focusing on how they manage the FX risk when they go to the international markets, depending on what currency they are issuing in. There was also a question around the diversification of their instruments as far as capital raising is concerned, coming from KMRC and the venture into green issuances, and whether or not they have a pipeline ready for products to be able to take up some of those houses being constructed, and whether they meet the eligibility criteria for green to match the green financing being raised. So we shall see if we shall get Datuk Chung back online so we get his closing comments. The next presentation which we are getting ready for will focus on mainstreaming sustainability in affordable housing, really just a build-up to the issue around green solutions. So it will be building green energy and resource efficient measures towards achieving SDG 11. That will be a presentation coming in from UN Habitat, which will be presented by Vincent Kitio, who is joining us shortly. But that is our next agenda item, after which then we shall have...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, are you back online?
I think we missed that one. Miss.
Datuk Chung, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry to have lost your signal. Please just speak up. The response you were giving was focusing on the issue of rent to own and what Chagamas is doing about it.
I'm just going to use this laptop.
Datuk Chung, are you there?
Can
You see us?
Yes.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. Maybe you can just proceed.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. What's the question again?
The
On the rent to own?
So the question was...
Okay, in terms of the rent to own scheme, basically, it is a challenge, I think, for most financial institutions because they are actually not willing to take on the tail end risk, meaning that because when the point the borrower purchasing the house, the price, the property could have moved. Or, for example, after the 5 years, borrower decide not to purchase. They want out because the rent to own scheme perhaps would give them the option. And then it's really a risk. So in Malaysia today, there's one scheme which is probably quite successful, which is based in terms of the Malaysian housing agency called Prima. They will work with Maybank in terms of selling their, we call this unsold units that they have developed, so that could actually be put into the rent-to-own scheme, and if any particular borrower is interested, they could actually enter into that program. So if there's any loss or variation in property price at the end of the period, that developer would basically be taking on the loss. But I think Chagamas is currently talking to a number of institutions to work out the scheme, and I can tell you that it is a challenge actually. So there must be some form of government intervention. So the best guarantor for property market fluctuation could be the government, but I don't think that is really something that the government or even any government agency should actually be involved in, because it's really of high risk. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, and thank you so much for your presentation. We shall close it at that. We really appreciate your insight on the Malaysian experience. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to take our tea break at this point, and it is now about 9:45 p.m. Let's be back here by 10:15, so that's 30 minutes, so we continue with our program. Tea should be served right outside here.
Recording stopped. realize that 60% of the African urban population are living in what we call informal sector. And therefore, these are the population that are living in inadequate housing. I think I will have problem with this. Maybe next slide, maybe you can just, it's not working. Sorry for that. Anyway, while they look at the slide and okay, yes, I was mentioning the fact that 60% of our urban population in sub-Saharan Africa are living in informal sector, and those are the bulk of the population that need housing. According to Shelter Afrique, the housing need in the continent is estimated, official figure, it's 60 million housing needs for the urban poor if we are to address the housing need. But from our estimation, we, from UN Habitat, based on some extrapolation, we realize that the housing need in sub-Saharan Africa is estimated at 160 million houses that need to be built if we are to address. But again, SDG 11, which is the SDG that is related to the urbanization and cities, SDG 11.1 is about accessing adequate shelter for all by 2030. And we estimate that by 2030, there will be an additional housing need of 70 million. What does that mean? Meaning that if we want to achieve SDG 11, we need to build by 2030 almost 250 million houses in sub-Saharan Africa. What is the situation in Kenya? According to the data that was presented to you yesterday, we have a housing shortage of around 2 million. The government, through the Big Four agenda, wanted to build 500,000 houses, and then the county government was supposed to build also an additional 500,000 houses. But you all know that this is huge number of houses, and if we consider that the building sector is also responsible of climate change, meaning that we can take that opportunity of building these new houses, making those buildings green so that we can also address climate change on the way. Sorry. And what I want also to bring to your attention is the fact that the building sector in Africa consumes around 56% of the total energy. And when we look at also the energy consumed in cities, we realize that 75% of the total energy generated are consumed in city alone. You may not know, but Nairobi consumes almost 50% of the total energy generated in Kenya. So ask yourself how other counties are using. And one of the reasons why city consumes so much energy is because of the type of houses, modern houses that are being designed and built every day. They do not take into consideration environmentally friendly aspects. As you can also see, this building that was designed in 1970, at the time, energy was not the clear issue. That's why we are sitting in the building where we have no windows, so we have to put out the lighting. And later on, energy was so cheap that architects did not take that into consideration, that they need to build houses that save energy. And today with the modern architecture, we are seeing glazing buildings, iconic buildings, which for me, I call them greenhouse, like the place where we grow flowers, because you want to increase the temperature in the greenhouse. And this is really what is happening in those buildings. That's why when you visit some of these buildings, even in a place that is cool like Nairobi, they need air conditioning. Just for your information, while coming here, I was listening to the news, and climate change is really affecting Tanzania. From tomorrow, there will be a power rationing, starting from 9 o'clock to midday, because there is not enough water in the dam to generate electricity. So imagine now if you have buildings that depend on electricity. With this power rationing, the productivity will go down. That's why we really need to do something about the way we design our buildings. And that is also the reason why we are saying that the building sector is very important in addressing climate change. Because the more energy you consume, the more greenhouse gas emission you also emit. Of course, all will also depend on how you generate your energy. So one of the points which is important to mention when we are looking at the housing sector, I talk about the housing needs, I talk about the deficit, I talk about the fact that affordable houses are not really adequate. I talk about several issues. But again, yesterday, some of the presentation talk about the value change in the building sector. If you ask yourself, why is it that we have a huge bulk of buildings that are yet to be built? Why are we in this situation? Why are we in the situation whereby 60% of the urban population live in shacks in sub-Saharan Africa, not just in Kenya? We know how it's Kibera. We know that in the past there have been attempts to build shelter for the population, for the urban and peri-urban poor. But when you look at the value chain in the building construction, you realize that we have not been addressing that very carefully. And P.S. Ingayeri yesterday mentioned that you need to look at all the points in that value chain. I myself, we have identified 7 key points that need to be looked. Of course, I'm not going to go into detail of all of the points. The first one is access to land. He mentioned yesterday that land in Kenya for the affordable houses, land will be given for free. There is also the fact that not just land, we need also to have services land. It's important if we need to address the housing. And then the other point in the value chain is the building design, the design of the buildings. We know that in the African context, 90, if not 95% of the buildings are designed by non-architects, are self-built houses. So why are we in that situation? Could we improve the situation? And then the other point is the building material. Our natural material are not valorized, are not given more attention. And perhaps sometimes we prefer to import material from outside than using local material. And then the other element in the value chain is the construction technique and also the construction technology. Those are, how do we build houses? We have seen that in America, for example, prefabricated houses are the main housing producer since many years, almost 100 years ago, they were a company that were prefabricating houses, building houses in industry, and then so that if you want a house in less than 3 weeks, you just choose the house in the catalog, and then you have your house, you have your home. This is not happening here. We cannot address the housing in Africa by just relying on the traditional method of buildings. We need to industrialize the sector. I was also very happy to hear that a group of Juakali are being put together to standardize some housing component. And then there is a funding issue, which is also very important. What type of funding? How do you remove the barriers in accessing those funding? This is very important because traditional way of asking collateral, asking title deed, asking this and that is not working. We have seen how M-Pesa was able to allow many people to access finance. So can we also be innovative in that sector? And then the last, not least, but very important, the housing owner. The person, the human being that should be at the center of the housing delivery. What is the purchasing power of that person? That is very key. If you don't do your calculation right, you'll end up building apartment that will be empty. You'll be looking for tenant, nobody will go there because you did not do that calculation right. So this is just to summarize what's basically the value chains that need to be done. I'm focusing now on the housing design, very key issue. We need more architects, we need more technicians in the housing sector. Of course, we have been hearing housing collapsing, we have been hearing also seeing housing that are very, very not friendly, not with no ventilation, with not lighting, because those houses are built by people who do not really understand. So we really need to invest more on capacity building so that we have more technicians. We may also invest on developing catalog so that people can just copy what is in the catalog, provided that it meets some minimum criteria of green building strategies. The other point which I also want to emphasize, and perhaps it has not been emphasized a lot, is building material. I mentioned to you that we need to build 260 million houses in sub-Saharan Africa to address the SDG 7. We are just 7 years to go. And if we look at the Kenya housing need, that is around 2 million now, we can expect that by 2030, the housing need, if business as usual continue, will be 3 million. What does that entail? That we need from now to 2030 build 1,200 houses in Kenya every day. Every day we should be building 1,200 houses if we are to achieve the SDG 11.1 in Kenya. This is where we are. Are we on track? And how do we do that? Someone said yesterday that the building sector is also the driver of the economy, because one house built will generate four jobs. That is what I heard yesterday. An MP in France 200 years back say that the building sector is, when the building sector is moving, everything moves. Job creation, increased productivity, improve health, many things. Even the politicians are happy because people are happy to live in new house. People are happy because they have job. And when we look at the type of building material we are having today, cement alone contributes 8% to climate change. Cement production. Because of the amount of energy that are needed to transform the material into cement. And if we want to reduce the carbon footprint of our buildings, we need to decarbonize the building sector, the building material. And therefore, it is important to look into alternative material. It is important to look into materials that today we consider waste. For example, in this picture, you are familiar with the stabilized saw blocks. How come we have not been able to really invest more in this sector? You can also see some bricks that are made of agricultural waste. And then at the same time, we need also to promote the growing of bamboo, because in China, for example, bamboo is one of the major building construction material, because the housing future has to be green. They have to be low carbon, and we should not be importing material all the time. So again, this is a sector that needs to be developed, and perhaps not just to develop, we need to take some of the proof of concept in the sector to apply it in our building. This is just prefabrication, just to mention to you that I have been in Kenya for quite some time. This sector has been neglected. If there are private company in the housing company in the room, please invest on prefabrication. I don't see any magic that will allow us to produce 1,200 houses every day if we are doing business as usual. We need to build industry where we build this, we produce this material there. These are some of the examples of stabilized saw block. I took this picture in May in Kisumu. You can as well see that it is possible to build multi-story houses using material that exists locally. Research has shown that this material can save up to 30% of the cost of the building. But at the same time, it also creates a very good environment in that. But we need to have new architects to start using this material, show the example. Because when we see iconic architects that are outside there, they are not using the material. That's why this material will always be considered as a poor man material. That's why people don't want to invest in that. Yes. So now, knowing that now how to build green. People normally think that building green is to put a solar panel in the roof. That's one assertion that people say the outside there. Other people say building green is to plant trees. Others also say building green is to paint the house green. So there are a lot of misconceptions outside there. But what we have come to realize is that building green is really the concept. You have this pyramid that you can see here. You need to minimize your carbon footprint as you are designing your building. You need to make sure that passive building elements are taken into consideration. I'm talking about natural ventilation, natural lighting, using local building material, and also try to use resource efficiency. So once you have designed your house taking into consideration those passive building elements, you will now realize that even air conditioning or lighting will be your need for air conditioning, lighting will be less. And therefore it's at the end that you can now put renewable energy at the end, so that you don't need to have big plan. So it is very important to the building sector can contribute to climate change if we reduce those materials that emit a lot of energy. I will just quickly now just go through this document, and just to say that they are very simple. We made it simple because we realized that every time people were asking, how do we do it? How do we do it? So the idea was, can we demystify the building construction sector? And then by having just these 20 elements that quickly show you some of the elements that the Green Building Council has also been advocating for. So there are 20 bioclimatic strategies in the buildings, and then 5 sustainable urban planning elements that need to be taken into consideration, and also element related to sustainable mobility. We are seeing more and more that if we need to reduce our carbon footprint, we need also to address our sustainable building sector. This is our building, our offices in Gigiri, where we actually, the design was very well conceived in such a way that even by putting solar panel in the roof, by the way, this is the first solar rooftop building in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in Kenya in particular. It was built in 2006. And as a result of this building, we are also able to influence the feed-in tariff in Kenya, because this building, we are, the energy generated there is allowing us to, is addressing, we are using only 60% of the energy generated to address our building energy needs. So this is also possible. But the design, just because the design of a building was also well done. So what are the 20 elements? Very quick, since you have them with you. The consideration of the site, the orientation of the building matter. When you go around, when you look at all the traditional, the tropical architecture that exists here, you really realize that they were very keen in this, in putting the proper orientation of the building. It doesn't cost anything, but what has also some research from South Africa has shown that if your building is well oriented, you could save up to 20% of energy need. And also the way you put, you distribute the indoor, and also the opening, the windows, the wall to window ratio is very, very key. The lighting, the solar shading. You will realize that all new buildings have no solar shading device. And I'm wondering why suddenly this has disappeared. Natural ventilation is also missing in most of our buildings. Building insulation is one of the things that we have not been able in Africa to do that. Only in our vernacular architecture, they were insulating buildings. The Maasai architecture was very good in doing that, and also some mud house that we see in around Lake Victoria. Why insulating building? You keep out the heat. You don't allow the heat to come in, and then you have air conditioning to remove that heat. You keep out the heat so that you can insulate it. This is a sector that required investment, because basically it will reduce your energy need. And then also the painting of the building, very important. Just this is a very one iconic buildings in Nairobi, and it's the most photographed buildings, by the way, in architecture in Africa. When you look at it, you can also see the different opening, the solar shading, the way it was designed. Although it faced the Nairobi Park, but at the same time, it's also recalled the traditional, the vernacular architecture. So this was just, why sharing this was just to tell you that building green does not necessarily mean that it's something artificial, it's something that is not reachable. It is possible. And just to conclude my this short presentation, I just want to say that to address the challenge of the housing sector, because we are here talking about affordable houses. And we have seen that Kenya, by 2030, we need to build almost 3 million houses if we want to give houses to all Kenyan citizens, which, by the way, deserve, because all citizens of Kenya pay taxes, so they deserve. If we do our mathematics right, we can actually give the house to everybody and they can pay. And therefore, to do that, we need to revisit the value chain and look at each element and see how are we doing in this value chain, and then how can we address it, how can we remove the barriers. And then at the same time, I've also demonstrated that we can reduce the carbon footprint of buildings by the way we choose our building material, by the way we design the houses, and also by the way we consume energy, by putting emphasis on renewable energy technology. But again, we should not start from the end. We need to look into all the elements. So, and I also insisted on industrialization of the building sector. That is the key. We need to do what P.S. Inga mentioned yesterday, standardization. We cannot keep having one side of the door, and then tomorrow we go and ask for another side. We should have one type of doors that can be built easily, and it is by standardizing the building component, the building element, that we can address the bulk of the housing shortage that we have today. So industrialization is one of the solutions, and finally, finance is very important. We need to study the different type of financings that exist. We need to be more innovative in the sector. I heard that the pension fund want to put money. By the way, the pension fund is not the only way of putting money. I know that if you are living in the house and you need to pay rent, and you have a decent job, you will not fail to pay your rent. And if now it's a mortgage that you are paying, you will do everything, you will be productive to pay it. So we need to be innovative also in the financing. And putting all this holistic approach will address the housing. I'm very optimistic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Santa. Unfortunately, you have gobbled up all the time we had for Q&A. Is there one burning question for him before I invite the next session, which is a panel? There's a hand here. Let's just take that one question and then we shall proceed to the next item.
Thank you very much, Bona Kitio. My question is regarding the designs of the houses, the affordable housing, because our target is mostly the low-income earners. Like, if you want the Juakali people to own a nice, affordable, habitable house, then we also need to come with it with an affordable way of managing. We know very well that our Mama Mboga, the Juakali people, they would wish to live in a good home. But the most expensive thing for these people is energy, maybe lighting, and bills that they have to pay when they live in those houses. That is why when people were at the Matare slum upgrading program, most of these people moved because they could not manage the bills. These are the people who are used to cooking with maybe firewood, jiko, or stove. So if you put them in a house where we don't give provision for such kind of sources of energy, then definitely they will run away from these homes. So as stakeholders in this field, we should think of coming up with a design, the houses where these people can easily manage to do their cooking without a lot of pressure. Because if you tell a Mama Mboga to live in a house where she will use gas or electricity to cook, definitely that is a tall order for them. So I don't know what we are going to do to ensure that these people, as much as we want them to live in a habitable home, what do we do to make those houses really affordable for these low-income people? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very, very interesting question, which also have some solution. You also mentioned the solution. If you look at the value chain, I mentioned, in my value chain, I mentioned housing design. And then I also mentioned the people you are designing the housing for. it is very important because planning is very key. If I'm designing a house for someone that I know that he cannot afford certain thing, there are solutions for that. For example, just a simple veranda when you are building, you are designing a house. I've been seeing a lot of so-called affordable houses, no veranda. Where are they going to sit? If we spend in Africa most of our time outside, first thing you need to take that into consideration. Natural ventilation has no additional cost. Having big windows and also with the protection will not give you additional cost, but it will give you the lighting in the house. Go to the slum, you realize that people are, during the day, putting the light on. Or even some of the modern buildings, they are putting the light on because there was no provision for windows. So you really need to look at all these elements. And today, with the renewable energy technology, that the price is continually going down, you can also as well put solar system that can just give the lighting. I'm not talking about the solar system for the fridge or a stove or what, just the basic. It is possible. And then when you are building these houses, you should not go more than 5-story building so that people don't need elevator to go there. They can walk. If you go, for example, I've seen in Japan, outside Japan, all the houses are 4-story outside, not what we are used to see on the TV, that they have a tall building. The residential houses are 4-story because they want people to walk. Walking, they do exercise. So basically, we need to design the house in condition, taking into consideration the habit. If people are using charcoal for cooking, yes, you design the house, you provide chimney, you provide ventilation, so that they can as well use that before they move the ladder to the different level. But if you just sit down, you close yourself in one office, you design, and then you go there because you were looking at low cost, cutting down, cut this, cut that, that will not be a solution. And this is, just to tell you, that is what we have been, we are also very happy that we are having this type of discussion, because housing is not just a product, it's a process. It's a design putting the people at the heart of the conceivement of the houses. Solution exists. They are not necessarily expensive.
Thank you,
It's just a matter of taking that into consideration.
Thank you, thank you. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. You can exit via that side. There's a staircase there. Thank you so much. Next on stage, we want to get into a conversation on climate change and affordable housing. This discussion will be moderated by Ted Otieno, who is the chairperson at KGBS. And we have Flora Muthaura as a panelist, head of risk and compliance at KMRC. We have Dennis Papa Odenyi from IFC, Sheila Mora as well, a civil engineer, head of ESG at ACON, and Peter Mayavi, International Housing Solutions. So let me welcome them on set. Ted, are you with us? Good morning. That conversation should last 40 minutes, then we transition into the next panel, which will take us to our lunch break. Welcome on set. The moderator can take the seat here. Please, you may have your seats, just maybe move closer this side. Oh, sorry, we don't have microphones on set here.
Thanks. Thanks a lot again. By way of introduction, my name is Ted Otieno. chairperson at Kenya Green Building Society and an engineer by training, as well as a sustainability consultant. So before I go to the rest of my panelists, I'd like to sort of set the scene for us here. When we hear climate change, everybody now at least has heard of climate change, and how does it tie to affordable housing? So maybe I'd like to ask the audience a question. Before I used to ask this, there were less hands up, but I'm sure most of the hands will go up. But how many of us believe climate change is real? Great, yeah, for sure. So most of us do believe that climate change is real. So allow me to set the scene for you. We talk about Kenya being, requires to build 250,000 units per year for the next 4 years to plug the housing deficit. That's the problem. But now let's assume that, 4 years from now is 2026. So let's assume that this is actually the year 2026, and we've built our 1 million homes, right? So assuming that now we're at 2026 and we built our 1 million homes, someone has talked about it being for the low income. So let's take this, let's actually put a person here. So Wanjiku is a mother of 2 living in one of these units. She purchased these units in a rent-to-own scheme. Now, 4 years later, it's now 2030. So now we've moved from 2026, where we had our 1 million homes, and we're at 2030. So Wanjiku is running into a challenge. The IPCC report back in 2021 estimated that water stress would affect about 250 million people globally, and she happens to be one of them. She gets water once a month, and when it comes, it's very expensive. Wanjiku hasn't paid her electricity bill for the past 2 weeks. Global warming has changed rainfall patterns and affected electricity production, and so the costs are now 4 times what they used to be. So she's not able to afford the per unit cost of electricity. Because she hasn't paid her bill, she now relies on buying food daily, because her fridge is now just another piece of furniture. Beef or anything meat is completely out of her dietary plans, as the persistent drought has made the cost of beef rise by close to 500% in the last 6 years. Wanjiku had come into the city looking for odd jobs closer to the urban areas. However, given the effect of climate change, most of these wealthy individuals have now left the city and are working remotely in areas outside the city where air pollution and other factors are deemed safe. Wanjiku does not have the luxury to afford a new construction, as she hasn't even completed the current affordable one. Now it's only 4 years down the line, and Wanjiku is forced to leave the city. The unit is no longer an affordable house. For some, it feels like a prison, and for some, a grave, and others, a liability. And that's her and a million other people. So I hope that sets the stage for this particular topic on climate change and affordable housing, and how the two are intrinsically tied. I'll have our panelists introduce themselves as they answer the question. So I'll start with Dennis of IFC. What is the so first of all, please, Dennis, introduce yourself before I ask you your question.
Okay, so as you mentioned, I'm Dennis Kwanzaa. I work with the IFC. I'm the Green Building Lead. I lead Green Building Program at the IFC. We introduced a program called EDGE, which basically is to help the built environment to be able to understand what it means to build green, what are the cost implications, and what the benefits are.
Thanks, Dennis. So Dennis, please tell us, what is the definition of climate-friendly affordable housing? And please give us a practical example.
So, I don't know if there's a straightforward definition. I doubt if you would get that. But basically, when you speak of climate-friendly affordable housing, you're looking at housing that in the long run would not negatively impact the environment, right? Basically any building at all that you put would definitely have an impact on the environment, but how can we reduce that impact to the barest minimum? And then looking at the affordability part of it, most of the time we talk about affordable housing without looking at the long-term impact, right? If the upfront cost of buying these homes or getting these homes are very cheap, but then the cost of actually running this building is going to cost me so much, then how affordable is it? I mean, with the example that you gave, I mean, the lady may have gotten the property at an affordable rate, but then you can see over 4 years, it becomes very expensive for her. She's not able to afford her utilities bills for the building and may have to now move out. So you always have to look at this right from the beginning. How can you ensure that the amount of energy and water that is needed to run this building is at the barest minimum, right? So that's one of the things that you would need to look at. Now at IMC, we've worked with a lot of our clients to really come up with some of these projects. We go the extra effort of getting these projects to be certified as well, because that's also another area where you could be able to now access some sort of funding for it, and then also to be able to really market and brand your projects as actually being climate friendly. So that's another area that the IMC is also working on.
Right, thanks Dennis. My next question will be to Peter. Peter, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Peter Mayavi. I'm the Managing Director of International Housing Solutions. I'm in charge of capital raising and investor relations.
Thanks, Peter. So, Peter, we acknowledge that affordable housing dream is still not a reality, and there are several gaps. IHS is a stakeholder in this space and has taken the view that the current housing and climate crisis are intrinsically related, and any improvement in one translates into improvement in the other. Please tell us how this has worked for IHS.
Yeah, I'm surprised when Dennis was told to give a practical example, and I'm sitting right here. He didn't give IHS. We are the largest practitioners of affordable housing edge in the continent. I think we have totally over 33,000 houses in the continent, and the ones which are edge certified, I think we are close to now 12,000 units, which are all affordable units. So Dennis, when you ask for an example, I'm right here.
Great. Thanks, Peter. So next I'll go to Sheila. Sheila, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheila. I work with ACON, and I currently handle the ESG function and also international fundraising within our capital markets group. Thank you.
So, Sheila, climate change is a reality now. In your opinion and based on your experience as a developer working at ACON, how important is it to future-proof affordable housing? And what does the reality of this look like if we're not able to do the same?
I think I'll just go back to what both Peter and Dennis mentioned about affordable housing. I feel like I want to poke that conversation a bit because I think we need to redefine affordable housing from both an ownership perspective and also a rental perspective. And if you look at the Kenyan market, the reality is most people can afford to rent now as opposed to buying. Even with the units, becoming very affordable, and we're getting very innovative financial solutions, I think we need to look at affordability from that perspective. Now, coming to the importance of future-proofing, I think I don't want to overstress what was shared by the speaker who was here earlier before us, who talked about the green building design that has to go into that. And just for all of us to appreciate, indeed, the impact, of what this has from a personal perspective. I feel like as practitioners and professionals in the industry, we need to bring the conversation of future-proofing and green building design closer home by making people appreciate that this affects my everyday livelihood. When you talk about floods, when you talk about food security, when you talk about drought, then people start to bring the conversation of climate change, closer home. And for us, especially in the real estate, it's just to appreciate the impact or the negative impact that real estate has on the environment. He talked about the greenhouse emissions. we utilize about 50%, you know, during the running of the building. So for me, I think the first place where the conversation needs to start really is to demystify what climate change is, what the impact is on buildings and on our everyday living from that perspective. But when you now go to, you know, professionally and from a design perspective, why should we future-proof? With, you know, COP27 and commitments that are being made by organizations and by countries, clearly it's going to be a compliance issue down the road, you know. And so it's to just look at future-proofing yourself or protecting the organization from a cost perspective, because down the road we'll have to do, you know, retrofits for our buildings, first to be in compliance, but also to just make the spaces livable for our people. You know, he talked about heating in the houses. We're having a change in our weather pattern. So it's just to be cognizant of what that will look like down the road and be able to appreciate and put that in place now. The other thing I think is also just from the operational perspective. I like the example you gave of Wanjiko. If Wanjiko is not able to pay bills, and also what one of the ladies brought up about the reality of, you know, what these bills look like, utilities, energy, and water. If we're not able to take care of those things down the road, then now this is the time to, you know, look at how then do we build our houses, how then do we put infrastructure in place that takes that into account. So for me, the biggest question in terms of future-proofing is what that retrofit cost looks like in the future. But then what do I practically do now, you know, with the resources that we have to make sure that it's a conversation that's happening, that's being implemented, you know. But also to just appreciate the multi-sectoral place that real estate has. You know, it's not just the builders, it's not just, there's the financing aspect, there's the construction aspect, there's the client, you know, the people who we're building for. So I think it's to just bring all that into the conversation onto the table and then be able to approach it from a practical perspective. So Dennis talked about how do we incorporate edge design, you know, and then to also just demystify in the sense that it doesn't have to be capital intensive, you know, as you start that journey. So I think for me, the conversation needs to start from that awareness. What can we practically do? What is practically feasible now? Then bring on board our designers, bring on board the architects, the engineers. What do we have locally available? What can actually be done from a cost efficient perspective? And then bring all that to the table, and we discuss how we're able to then produce units that indeed would be future-proof for the negative climate impact that we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Now I'll go to Flora. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ted. My name is Flora Modaura. I head risk and compliance at Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company.
Thanks, Flora. So, Flora, what are some of the climate considerations KMRC has instituted to ensure affordable housing finance is extended sustainably?
So when you think about the core mandate of KMRC is really extending long-term finance to primary mortgage lenders. So our influence in climate change comes about through the way we channel this funding to the primary mortgage lenders, and with this influence comes responsibility. So in this regard, we've been able to implement an environmental and social risk management framework bigly to guide the mortgage lending activities for the primary mortgage lenders. And it's benchmarked against the sustainable finance principles, the environmental laws, as well as international best practices. So what this framework aims to address is looking at the environmental risk exposures that pose an impact to the housing, the affordable housing program, as well as the mortgages that are being disbursed by the PMLs. So we really, part of the procedures is providing an exclusion list, which mainly guides the PMLs on properties which we consider ineligible for financing. And when you look at the impact of climate change, which come about with floods, we finance houses where, for example, areas which were previously occupied by land, but as a result of climate change, now the areas are flooding. So we look at flood-prone areas or riparian land or areas susceptible to climate change. We also go further to look at critical natural habitat. We want to protect the legally protected areas like our forests, like the national park. We don't want a situation where we actually cut trees and build houses. So the environmental and social risk management framework is mainly implemented to be able to guide the primary institutions to be able to conserve our environment. But essentially, we also aim to protect the interests of the borrower in terms of security of tenure. We don't want a situation where we actually finance that person who owns an affordable home, and then later on in future, they are not able to sustain that home. So it needs to be sustainable in terms of the location where the house is located, as well as the environment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Flora. So I'm going to ask each of you one last question. In the essence of time, I'd like you to not take too much time in answering them so that the audience can also ask you a few questions. I think this is a very relevant topic and they will have questions for you. So, Peter, back to you. Paint a picture for us with numbers of how you see the current affordable housing problem being tackled and how then the reality of climate change becomes an opportunity, now that we talked about it as a problem, especially from government being a key enabler for affordable housing.
Okay, I'll start by a comment that Dennis made regarding the measuring of the performance over time. For IHS, having adopted EDGE a while back, and we one of the ways we make sure that it's actually an impact, we go back and measure how these units perform. And with that, we actually have numbers, but just permit me to refer in terms of impact. And in terms of impact, for instance, the employment we create for every house that we do, we create 3 person years. In terms of water savings, and these are all EDGE units. In terms of savings, every unit that is EDGE certified, we save about 96 kiloliters per month, and then you can take that and sort of extrapolate it over for a year. Per month, we also save about 30% of the electricity used. Annually, that's about 761 kilowatt hours for every unit. In terms of CO2 emissions, as Sheila mentioned about green gas emissions, we save about 10,000 kilograms for the 40-year life of the unit. So we've gone back and actually measured actual numbers on how EDGE impacts affordable housing. And by the way, I'm talking this for a very small unit. This is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit. Now imagine if we could do this for every unit that we develop, whether it's affordable or not. Just every unit that is lived in. You can see how these numbers can actually go towards impact. We've measured that for every year that a person lives in an IHS unit, they are able to save 1 month in rent for the year that they live there. So it means we are actually putting money back in people's pockets just because of going green. So we do have impact, and this is impact now that we've gone back and measured and seen how this can be able to actually save somebody money. So if it's 1 month of rent, let's say you're paying rent of 30,000, and every year you save 30,000, that actually goes towards, it can go towards your mortgage, it can go towards buying more meat, or as you were describing meat.
Thanks a lot. Peter, I think it's very good that you mentioned 10,000 kilograms of CO2 per unit saved. As you said, our deficit is 1 million units, so you can imagine if you're doing 10,000 times 1 million of CO2 avoided, what that does for our NDC and our nationally determined contributions. And again, with the voluntary carbon markets as a carbon offset, that's a huge opportunity. So Sheila, really quick, in very simple and easy to understand terms, what is a green bond? We know Aecon floated the first green bond, and what are the potential applications of the same based on your experience that could make affordable housing a reality?
Okay, green bond is basically, like any other vanilla bond or a debt instrument that then supports projects that have a positive environmental impact. So it also has to be in compliance to the climate bond standards as promulgated by CBI, the Climate Bonds Initiative, and then also following through the green principles as promulgated by the International Capital Markets Authority. So it's basically that the funds that you obtain or that you're able to raise as a green bond have a framework within which they have to operate. So first, use of proceeds has to be for earmarked green projects. And green buildings, I won't go into that. EDGE is one of the certifying bodies for that. So it's basically that you align to a recognizable benchmark internationally. Management of proceeds, that there's actually consistent checks to ensure that the proceeds are used for green buildings. Selection of these buildings, they have to be in line with IFC social and performance standards. I won't go into that. I think the earlier speaker talked about that as well. And then having an added layer of reporting to just show that you're actually using these proceeds, to avoid greenwashing that has been coming up, with various funding agencies, and then having another external third-party verifier, which was also set out by our own Capital Markets Authority. So that's basically what a green bond is. How it would then loop into helping us with the whole affordable housing space, I think that's a conversation to be had with the funding agencies to ensure that we incorporate pricing, into anyone who's raising a green bond, because it's very discouraging for the small and medium enterprises to have to go the extra mile of going green, yet it doesn't reflect in pricing. So if we're able to price green bonds or green loans or sustainable loans in a way that makes them attractive, then this has an impact on affordable housing, because you contribute towards reduction of cost that then is passed on to the end consumers.
Thanks a lot, Sheila. Sheila and Peter, since you have practical examples, maybe don't want to take for granted, since I know the both of you, please let our audience know where these units are and some of these developments that you have, so that, I don't want to take for granted that, just because you're sitting here that everybody knows what we're talking about. And also talk about, what exactly is green about these units that you've developed.
Okay, for Acorn, we are in the space of provision of rental housing. Currently, we're doing student accommodation, and I'm sure you've seen our buildings around Kwetu, providing student accommodation to people in university. We've got 7 operational properties, one at Wilson View, it's called Wilson View near Strathmore. We've got one in Hurlingham near Daystar. We've got 2 near USIU. We've got one in Jogoo Road and Ruaraka and in Parklands. What's green about the buildings is basically what was talked about earlier, the passive design elements, natural ventilation, natural lighting, and then when you go into use of fittings, so like LED lighting, we've taken care of our window to wall ratio to just take care of that balance. What the earlier speaker talked about, building orientation to manage your heating and to just manage, the space within the buildings. The other thing we've done is we've also incorporated solar because reduction of our carbon footprint is critical for us. So now we have about 20% of use of solar energy in our buildings, and we intend to push that up to about 40%. So that's what we've incorporated for the green building designs.
Thanks, Sheila. Peter, really quick.
IHS is a private equity fund, and we've been in operation since about 2005. We started in South Africa. We've expanded in Namibia, Botswana. We closed the Kenya fund in June of 2021, so we are actually in the process of deploying that capital. In Kenya, we don't yet have any units, but we are signing. How we work is we work with developers. So we've signed, I think, 2 deals have gone through investment committee, which have been approved. So we work with developers where we offer an offtake for their units, and we make sure that they build green. So in Kenya, the units are coming. We just don't have them yet. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Peter, and we look forward to that. So Flora, what are some of the risks and opportunities that come about with greening the mortgage sector?
Probably just to start with the opportunities, I think they're endless. With the presenter who came in before us, he presented a case where we could easily achieve green housing using simple designs. And really this is a challenge to the architects in the room, or even the ones who blogged on social media. If a client has approached you and they want you to do a design for their home, honestly, you should be recommending green buildings. And another opportunity, especially for the financial sector, is to develop the green products. Last year, October, we saw the regulator implement climate risk management guidelines, which is a step in the right direction to really encourage the financial institution to factor in climate change as part of their governance and strategy, and also risk management frameworks. So part of strategy is really seeing how you can expand the business, and one of them is creation of green products. When you look at the KMRC model and how it was structured, it's predicated on frequent issuance of bonds in the capital markets, and we are quite keen to issue green bonds. And I think I agree with Sheila on this one, that we need to develop a pricing mechanism for the bonds in our market, because when you look at the current market environment, interest rates are quite high. And when you issue a green bond, the interest rate will be equally high, though there's a tax incentive that comes with the green bond. So if we are able to address the price issue, we'll be able to channel more long-term funding to affordable housing. We issued a bond early in the year with a target of 1.4. We were able to receive bids worth 8.1 billion. And this one mainly speaks to the kind of liquidity that we have in the market. There's a lot of liquidity, and investors are demanding more in terms of the securities that are being offered. And it also presents an opportunity for NSE to deepen the capital markets. So really, in terms of opportunities, the products we can create, there are quite many and they vary. For the risks, on a positive and also as a challenge, as more people really embrace green housing, the risk is really on houses that are not green. You may suffer because of devaluation. Green housing has an effect of attracting the market value of a house. So it's really a good pressure in that it will drive retrofit of buildings to bring them to a level where they can be termed as green. So it's really more on the opportunities rather than the risks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Flora. Dennis, finally, please tell us how the IFC is working with governments within the climate sector to make affordable green buildings a reality.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, IFC's mandate is to work with the private sector. We come up with opportunities that would help the private sector thrive. But then we've identified that in certain areas we need a lot of government support, and one area is in the issue of climate, right? So what we have done is to provide the technical pathways that the government can use to be able to help mitigate or adapt to the climate issues. Now, these technical pathways, it actually includes that as advising them on what needs to be done. This could be in the form of should there be much more efficient building codes? Should there be proper building regulations that can really help to change the mindset and how people do stuff in the particular country? We make available some of the tools that we have. Sheila and then Peter mentioned EDGE. Apart from EDGE, we do have another tool called Building Resilience Index. We do have APEX. All of these are tools that we introduce to the government and then help them to be able to implement it. And then the other way is also working with them on incentives, right? Sometimes it doesn't all have to be laws, but then very little incentives go a long way in creating the enabling environment that would help developers to want to do something else. So we've done this not only in Kenya. Well, in Kenya, I remember 2 years ago, 2020, we worked with KGBS to support the State Housing Department to implement EDGE as, one of the standards that they were using for the affordable housing program. Right, so that's the one way. Other countries will be able to work with them on their building codes to come up with a much more efficient one. And then I did mention incentives. We've seen it to be a very low-hanging fruit, right? Some of these incentives may not even be physical in the sense that it's not going to even cost the city or the government any money. we've seen the city of Takoradi in Ghana implement expedited permitting, right, where projects that decide to build green, when they apply for permits, they get their permits quicker than ordinary projects, right? This encourages developers to want to go green, because sometimes how soon they're able to get their permits will determine how quickly they get their funding. And that would mean how soon they can get the project done. So it becomes a very exciting opportunity for them. There are other incentives that we encourage other cities, like height bonus. I mean, maybe the zoning requirement for that area is saying 4 floors, but then because your project is going to be green, the city allows you to build 5 floors. That 5th floor is extra money for the developer, right? So we tend to discuss all of these options to see what works best for a particular city. What would work for city A may not work for city B. So you need to really discuss it with them to see which of these areas that they are willing to focus on.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dennis. And now I'd like to go back to the audience, and before I open it up for questions, I'd like to ask you a question. How many of us think our electricity bills in our houses is high? Great, a lot of hands up. So how many of us think that's 30% of our income? How many of us think that high bill is 30% of our income? None. Right, so when we talk about affordable housing, you can imagine that there are people who spend 30% of their income, on that. So just to keep a picture, because sometimes we talk about Mama Mboga, but I know because I also have a company, I run a company, and I hire youth, and I speak also on behalf of the youth. There are youth that spend more than 30% of their income on housing. It's unaffordable for them too. So this crisis, we need to solve it together. We have all the, solutions within us in the room. So let us purpose to solve it, because it is something that we can all agree that we can solve. So I'd like to open it up to you guys to ask the panelists some questions. Please feel free.
My name is Mark Ambito. I'm from Third Dimension Architects. And my question is directed towards Sheila. In refer to what he has just said, I stay next to one of your units. And I stay in a 2-bedroom house. And I pay equivalent to what a student in your unit is paying, though I'm a middle class. And very few people can afford to stay near to where I stay. And I really wonder, why are you not doing the affordable units? Because I'm sure if something is to happen in one of your units, the names will be who is who in this country. Thank you.
I think that's a bit of a political question, but anyway. We look at affordability, and it's interesting that you mentioned about 30%. We look at affordability from an all-in cost perspective. So for example, when you look at your housing, you look at transport to your work. When you look at your monthly expenditure, you look at your transport to your workplace, you look at your utility bills, you look at your Wi-Fi bill, and all other things. So what we provide in Kwetu for our students is we give them an all-in cost. So once someone pays that, for example, for the legacy projects like the ones in Jogoo Road, Ruaraka, and Parklands, we actually provide transport to their universities. So the cost of transport, which is again another 10% of your monthly income, is taken off. Then when you stay within Kwetu, all the utilities are also taken care of, your electricity, your Wi-Fi bills, and we also take care of other, what you'd call incidental costs. So we are in the affordable space, but I think it's just important for all of us to define what that looks like from a rental perspective. We've got 2 products. So we've got Kwetu, and we have just recently launched what we call Kejani. Now, Kejani has now been sort of tailored to be able to accommodate more of our students, plus people in universities and also tertiary institutions. And the rental rates actually for Kejani, I would dare to say, are very, very affordable because of the all-in approach that we look at towards rent for the students. And for Kejani, it's between 8.5 and 13 per month, but we look at providing the full all-in cost. So I think also it's for us to be cognizant of what is the need that we have in the market, and then how do we approach it. And so from where ACON sits, we've been able to look at what that need is, what the gap is, and be able to now start providing different products to be able to cater for our students. And as testament to that, I don't think we have, as you said, who live with that. We actually have all the properties occupied. We have about 95% occupancy. So there's really a need. It's just that we have to be creative and innovative in terms of how we provide these solutions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sheila. Take another question. I think I have 5 more minutes if I'm not wrong.
Good morning, Ted and the team. Steve Aldridge here.
Hey, Steve.
First of all, I wanted to put a little bit of global context on the agenda here, because we have to congratulate Africa as contributing only 3% of the carbon emissions in the world. Secondly, we have to congratulate Kenya on having 93%, I think it is 93% sustainable energy. Now, in that context, how do we justify investing money in our green agenda against what the other parts of the global economy do not invest? And then add to that, and picking up on Peter, good morning, Peter, picking up on Peter's comment about I think it was 10,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions on the IHS homes. But of course, that's going to be different in Kenya, because that talks about embodied energy. And the carbon emissions in Kenya related to embodied energy are different, much, much lower. So how will IFC Edge evaluate the country differences and the continental differences of that impact? So that's my question really to IFC. How will Edge be flexible enough to recognize these huge differences and where Kenya stands leading the world as a sustainable energy producer?
Thanks, Steve. I think Dennis is up to take that question.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting. It's actually one of the reasons why we came up with Edge, to be able to account for some of these differences in the different countries where we operate. So within Edge, you would realize that it is looking at the baseline. What is the baseline in Kenya, right? And then over and above that baseline, how can people be able to still get their project to be more efficient, right? So we shouldn't just be comfortable on the fact that because the energy is already 93% renewable, so people should just do anything that they want to do. But then over and above that, what else can we do? So the baseline that we have within Edge for Kenya, you would realize it will be different from what it is in South Africa. It's different from what it is in Ghana or what is it in Nigeria. That's why sometimes you would certify a project in one country, you do the simulation of that same project on the Edge app using a different country, and it doesn't meet it, right? It's mainly because of these baselines that have been built in there, looking at what sort of energy is being used in that country, how efficient are these energy sources, how do people build, what are the climatic conditions in there. So the software is very, very interactive. It's very, very smart, and it's able to accumulate all of this. And the interesting thing is it's something that we update regularly. So over time, I'm sure Sheila would acknowledge that when she certified her first project, it was a version that was very easy to use. But over time, when we realized that there's been a change in how buildings are being done in a particular place, the kind of measures that are being used in the project, we have to make sure we also update it. to meet that. Currently, it's in version 3, and we have a lot of people telling us now it's very difficult to meet. It's not that it's difficult to meet, but then now there's a lot more awareness than it used to be before. So certain measures which you already had in your project, in previous projects, are really nothing innovative now. They are not innovative, so you need to go over and above. So it's kind of challenging you to go over and above what you are used to.
Thanks, Dennis. I'd like to close the panel unless there's a very burning question. There is one, so I'll have that one. And
thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Jennifer, and my question is to do with the design of buildings. I don't know whether, to do with the presentation that was done before, and it's in relation with climate change. Because a lot of those elements that make a building conform to climate, whatever adaptability, are to do with design. And I'm just wondering, is it possible to compel through policy the development approval department so that a building is not approved, or it's harder to be approved if it doesn't comply with all these elements? Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. So I don't know who wants to take that. Peter, you want to take that?
Yeah. Let me start, and then maybe Flora can finish.
Oh, I'll give you 1 minute, so it's just you who'll answer it, unfortunately.
Oh, okay, no problem. What we found out over time is that if you make the incremental cost for making a building green to be not that high, then the incentive is there for developers to actually adopt it. So for us, for instance, over time, we've been able to bring down the cost of edge, of becoming edge from, it used to cost us about $1,000 per unit for the construction cost, all the way down to between $250 to about $500. If you find, this is about, let's say, 50,000 shillings for a building which is going to cost between 2.2 to 3 or 5 million shillings to build, then you find that incremental cost is not that high. So when you present this to a developer, then it's not a problem. So I think that's where the conversation starts, that you make sure that the cost of making a building green is not that high, because it's always going down to the bottom line. Every developer is looking at how much money is going into their pockets. And then another thing about edge, and why edge is actually much easier to use than all the other greening, and I'm not speaking against LEED or any other, it's just that edge is, for us, we found it much easier, because there are only, out of 40 something interventions, once you do 13 of them, then you are edge certified. Yeah, so, and we find that that's much easier to get that certification than any other form of certification. And some of these certifications are easy. Something like window to wall ratio is about the design with the architect. Something about, orientation. I mean, literally, it's just the architect saying you should put this building in this particular way on your land. That doesn't take much. It doesn't take them much to do that, So we find that these are some of the interventions that make it quite cheap to achieve.
Yeah, thanks. Flora, did you have something burning to say? Okay, great. So I'd like, I know this, I'm not sure, I'm out of time, right? I can take a question? Okay, let me take a question before I close the session.
Thank you, Ted. Mine is, I think, just a curiosity, and I think I direct it to Sheila. There is this emergence of flat roofing style. Is that anything to do with edge?
Okay, I'll not speak on behalf of Dennis with regard to edge, but for us what we're doing is the flat roofing enables you to accommodate slightly more solar panels. And so it's a better design for us, and it's more cost effective. So if you look at, for example, our buildings, Yosayu 3, the buildings near Yosayu and the buildings in Hurlingham, we're adopting that because placing of the solar panels becomes easier. And then also within our location, Kenya, because of where we are, it's the best place to put your solar panels within at the roof level, because then you're able to get the maximum what you call it, radiation from the sun that will enable you produce an optimum level. So for us, it's because of ease of placing of solar panels, not necessarily to do with edge, so to speak. Yeah.
Great. So I think with that, I'd like to end the session, but I'd like to pose a challenge to the rest of the audience. As we are building this affordable housing, you know, wherever we build, we're introducing a creature into the environment. So we should ask ourselves as responsible citizens, what is that creature? How is it going to relate with the rest of the environment? How is it going to relate with water, energy, and the materials? The material extraction that has taken place in order for us to have that building, the amount of water that building is going to use, the amount of energy. We should be responsible about how we go about that. I know I've been asked as chairperson before, what is the difference between a sustainable building and one that's not green? There shouldn't be any difference. If we're going to build, let's build sustainably, or let's not build at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel, and thank you to the moderator. That was quite impressive. Sorry. Thank you, and thank you to the audience for the questions which came following that. There was also a question coming in online, but I think it was addressed when the question was asked from that corner around, does IFC Edge take into account country-specific environmental issues? I think that was catered to in the response that was given. Next on stage, we have a panel focusing on new technology and innovation to support affordable housing. And that panel will be moderated by architect George Arabu from AAK, that's the Association of Architects, I believe, in Kenya. The members of the panelists, rather, are Ayub Naburi, Council Member ISK. We have Jenny Musimi, President IQSK. Simon Dixon, co-founder Kwangu Kwako, and Holger Vogt, that is from Amena, Africa. Sorry, I'm being informed that the moderator was changed to Brenda Nyawara, so welcome on set to the moderator and the panelists. Come along so that we kickstart this conversation on new technology and innovation to support affordable housing. Karibuni. That conversation will be taking us from this time till our lunch break. That should be about 12:20 thereabout. We have a Q&A, and then we'll be able now to break for lunch and prepare for our afternoon session. So the moderator, if you could come this side so that we have some good balance on set. And to our audience online, please keep your questions coming. We shall sample them even as we pick questions from the floor. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Maybe I should move closer to my panel. All right, so welcome to the panel session for today, new technology and innovation to support affordable housing. My name is Brenda Nyawara, Vice Chair, Architects Chapter from AAK, Architectural Association of Kenya. Allow me to introduce to you my panelists for today. Ayub Naburi next to me. Ayub is a registered and practicing valuer, estate agent, investment analyst, and certified professional mediator based in Kenya. He's a lecturer at the Department of Real Estate and Property Management, Technical University of Kenya. In addition, he is the vice chair of Estate Agents Registration Board and council member in the Institute of Surveyors of Kenya. He is currently pursuing a PhD in construction economics and management at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. He holds a master's degree in valuation and property management and bachelor's degree in real estate, both from the University of Nairobi. Welcome. Round of applause, please. All right, next we have Jennifer Musimi. Jennifer Musimi is a registered quantity surveyor. She is the president of the Institute of Quantity Surveyors of Kenya. She holds an MBA in strategic management and is an entrepreneur in the construction industry. She is a seasoned leader, having served in the board of the National Construction Authority, NCA, the Africa Association of Quantity Surveyors, AAQS, and Women in Real Estate, WIRE, among others. Welcome, Jen. Next, we have Simon Dixon. Yes, Simon is a co-founder of Kwangu Kwako Limited, a registered social enterprise in Kenya which delivers safe, secure, healthy, modular, affordable homes and community structures to families in low-income areas of Kenya. Simon has varied experience comprising of 20 years in the UK in construction and property, having worked with consultants and client organizations, culminating as the Regional Projects Director at Unite PLC, managing an annual construction portfolio of over 80 to 100 million pounds annually, that is, before setting up property consultancy Kanda Management Limited. Round of applause, please. And then we have Holger Vogt. Holger is a managing director of Amena Africa, a pan-African market advisory firm headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. The company offers an array of services ranging from market studies, business development and sales support to in-market concierge services. Amena Africa has supported several international construction companies and building technology providers from across the globe on their route to market. Welcome, Holger. All right, so I'll start the first question with Jen. In line with this panel discussion's theme and your vast experience in practice and in leadership in the regulatory bodies in Kenya, Kenya's construction industry, what can you consider to be new technology in the construction industry?
Thank you for the question. What can I consider as new technology in the construction industry? That's something that has cost benefits and efficiency advantages. Not necessarily new, maybe even existing. We are talking innovation. When we look at the construction itself, we are looking at either use of appropriate technology, which the challenge should be, or rather the work to do there is acceptability. Why is bricks, for example, not acceptable building material in Nairobi? When we look at now the modern and the new technologies, then we want to look at automation or digitization, both in the design, where we want to look at BIM as an application to make the efficiency in design and to reduce errors in the design. And we're also talking about methodologies that are making the design easier to deploy, standardization, use of modular, and things that methodologies that are going to make the construction cheaper in the long run in terms of cost of construction and cost of cost of use during the use of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I actually want to drop in Holger in response to the new technology that Jen has mentioned. What would you consider to be the risks associated with replacing traditional methods with these new building techniques, materials, and processes?
Thank you, Brenda. I wouldn't necessarily say that we are replacing anything here, right? Brick and mortar is here to stay. Right, I think that's a fact. The question is, how can we reduce the use of brick and mortar? And technologies and innovations, I think, play a crucial role here to really support the ecosystem to build faster, to build more, and on the same quality level. So when it comes to innovations, I mean, from our side, we work with quite a number of companies who were quite innovative in the materials they used. So it can be anything from plastics, bamboo, sand and plastics, etc. But at the same time, most of them are not solving the challenge of what we are facing right now, which is the shortage of building houses. Right, so if you build, let's say we work with a firm called Polycare. They are working within, they're producing bricks made of sand and plastic. Can they scale? Maybe, but not on the level yet that we need, what we heard yesterday about the 200,000 units that we need a year. Impossible. Do we have technologies that could solve that problem? Yes. I think one is sitting next to me to an extent. From our side, we also work with a firm from Austria called Neuland, who are in the precast sector. And who very much meet and address the issue. Now, when it comes to the risk, Brenda, that you asked, yes, there is a big risk, particularly for innovation that have not been proven on scale level. Right? Building one house, fine. I'm sure the concept can be proven, but really having mass production with it, I think implementing it really takes a lot of understanding. Are they able to deliver what is currently being tested? Look at what's happening at the coastline, 3D. Will 3D be here to stay? Maybe. Will they be scaling? Maybe not, but I think that's something we yet have to see and has to be proven. But I think the main risk here is will those new innovative technologies and building materials, are they really what we need to close gaps? On the private level, 100%. On the mass scale level, I would have my doubts.
Thank you so much, Holger. It is noteworthy what you mentioned, that we are not trying to replace old building techniques, that we are trying to actually complement and gradually transitioning towards a better building ecosystem. I want to throw this question to Ayub. Now that we are working towards bringing in more innovation and technology, how can we use this to solve the housing deficit in Kenya?
Thank you. From the land economist perspective, the supply of housing or property is fixed in the short run. So what technology can help us do is to improve on the elasticity of supply through putting up structures within the shortest time possible. And that can also help in terms of even reducing the cost of finance. We know that cost of finance attracts some considerable interest during the construction period. So as you shorten the period, then the cost of finance will be less, resulting into affordable housing. Secondly, as you are aware, the cost of land has been an issue. It's quite, if you look at the proportion of cost of land to the project costs, it ranges between 20 and 40%. So what technology will help us is to optimize the use of land. So as you optimize the use of land, you're basically reducing the contribution of land in the project cost. So then again, that will result into more affordable units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayub, for highlighting on two of the ways in which we can reduce the housing deficit by reducing the cost of finance and the cost of land. Now to Simon, who has actually been delivering affordable housing units, could you elaborate maybe experiences you've had with the use of this new technology, maybe good or bad?
Sure, no problem. I mean, I agree with Jennifer. We use traditional products mainly at the moment. We use precast concrete and metal. We are looking at some recycled plastic, but we're struggling to get that currently to the cost level. And we've talked to many partners on recycled plastics. But it's using them differently. I mean, our precast concrete panels, houses that we produce, they're using the EDGE system where 70% less embodied carbon than the baseline building. So you can, while people say concrete is a pariah of climate change, using it in a different way, it can be used sensibly. And the other thing about our product is we've designed all of our products that they can be recycled at the end. So our buildings, if they become no longer useful in that location, they can be dismantled and relocated elsewhere. So the permanent buildings, but rather than demolishing it to rubble, you can take it to bits piece by piece. And we're just launching some new hollow blocks here. We've got a stand up there if people want to go and see. And that again is the same principle. And we're moving more towards, can people self-build? Because our original product, the panel system, could only really build. We did design, manufacture, build, and it was very difficult, not simple for somebody else to build. But we are testing. So again, looking at the innovation, we've had a couple of people test our systems. Thank you, Steve, over there. Steve was one of our guinea pigs to test whether a layperson could do it. And the theory is, if Steve can build without panels, anybody can. So. So now, obviously, then looking at, we keep looking at other products all the time, but the price point we're working at is super tight and very, very sensitive. So I'd love to use more recycled plastic, but so far the recycled plastic bricks and blocks in particular tend to be 50 to 75% more than we currently are at. So, you know, as soon as we get something that is more environmental, we'll substitute in. But I think innovation, as I say, as well, is how you sell, how you deliver your product. So as I say, we were protecting the brand, we're doing everything ourselves, managing the whole value chain. It's difficult to scale doing that, so everything now has to be able to be built ideally by the layperson, or be built incrementally as well, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I'd like you to kindly highlight on the cost attached to your technologies to apply in your projects, for example, the precast concrete. And this is a question I'd also like to direct to Jen after, on the costs attached to new technology in construction. So maybe Simon starts.
Yeah, my team will tell me if I get these numbers wrong, but the precast concrete panels, material supply, everything you need to build the wall other than labour is $14.85 a square metre, and the hollow blocks are $16.50 a square metre. And the hollow blocks are self-finished on the outside, and you only need to fill the joints on the inside. So you save on the render on both sides as well, and you don't need mortar on the joints. So the savings beyond the actual material price.
Quite impressive. Yes, Jen, maybe you can comment on that.
Well, my comment on the costs attached to innovation will be twofold. One, of course, the direct costs, which the materials have been highlighted, which may not change because even if you use a different technology. But the other aspect is the indirect costs, and when it comes to mechanization, it's a cost of the equipment. If you're doing precast and modular technology, then you have to deploy equipment on site. That capital cost is what discourages a lot of people to adopt technology. But then that should be countered by the savings, like Ayuba said, you're likely to make because of hasten or the speed you gain in the construction. You reduce on construction finance, and you go faster to gaining income and revenues to a completed building. So, so those are the main benefits, I would say. But the other indirect benefit, and which are related to cost, is when we use traditional or locally available materials in Kenya, for example, to do high-rise buildings, stone is quite heavy. And when you go high-rise, it becomes the cost of the frame and the cost of supporting the structure is increased, as opposed to if you are using precast walls and you use gypsum and all that. But the issue is the adoption. Developers and a lot of clients in Kenya think if the wall in your residential house is made of gypsum, the neighbor will hear your noise, or you don't look as successful if you have brick walls which are lighter. So there's a lot of sensitization which we need to do to the public to increase the adoption of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. With emphasis on savings, depending on the speed you will take to put up the construction finance, also better quality assurance. And she's given the example of less formwork needed when you transition from masonry, heavy construction to lightweight construction, for example. Okay, so I'd like to turn this conversation to Holger. We've heard of automation and standardization in construction trying to be a solution to mass housing production. And do you agree with this assertion?
Yes, I do, but I would add one element, which is digitization, right? I think that element has to be added to the equation, and maybe just to make a point, from my perspective, is always from the mass housing, right? So that's sort of where, let's say, most of my answers will come from. So yes, I agree, and I think also we have to turn that discussion when it comes to building, not just building homes, we will have to move to manufacturing homes, right? So remember the mass approach. And when we talk about manufacturing, what's manufacturing all about? It's about saving time and cost, right? And it's the economies of scale, using and repeating processes multiple times in order to achieve the best outcome for it. So, and if you look at that, that's how you can reduce price, particularly when it comes to the, in our case, the shell construction cost, etc., significantly. And of course, you're saving a lot of time with all the works you have to do left, right, center. I mean, precast, as you mentioned, Simon, is, I think, one of the key drivers when it comes to achieving mass housing production, because I think what a lot of construction firms are underestimating is the time they spend on reworking things. Right? If you think about a precast as a solution, you have to do the design thinking way before you actually start casting, because otherwise you're wasting time again. So that means all your pipe exits, your electricity lines, etc., they'll already be inside the process, which will reduce time significantly. If I may just put one comment here, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Jamhuri Showgrounds, where they have a small affordable housing village. Have a look, go and also see the house that one of our clients has built. You'll see how it's done. The house that you see there has been assembled in 6 hours, and I'm sure it's similar on Simon's side, and it's done. You're ready to move in, you just have to finish it if you like. So I guess, yeah, to answer the question, yes, I totally agree, but let's add the digitalization process to it, because I think only if you add digitalization to it, you also have accountability and transparency within the construction process.
That is a very interesting take, Simon, on manufacturing homes, where now we're looking at saving time and cost. And if I may add, even less waste, emphasis on safety, and emphasis on energy efficiency. So my next question to, actually, sorry, that was Holger. My next question to Simon Dixon, now that we are manufacturing homes, which components of a house can be easily standardized and mass produced at great savings?
In my theory, all of them. So we're manufacturing off-site the walls, the windows, the doors. We're currently looking at the internal utility wall between the bathroom and the toilets with all the services in. And we're looking at recycled plastic door frames, recycled plastic doors. Basically anything, ultimately at the moment, it's anything that causes timber door frames warp, so plastic one, recycled timber doors on the are a problem. Yeah, because of all the moisture and everything. So as we find problems, we're fixing them. The utility wall, our current panel system for the base product is surface-mounted pipes and cables. So obviously the utility wall allows those then to be put inside, and we can pre-test them off-site before we bring it to site. So that takes a lot of the risk away. So just fixing the problems as we go along at the moment, but I believe just about everything, certainly in the upstructure, can be done off-site. The ground slab and the substructure can be and has been done elsewhere, but obviously with the varying site conditions, that's a little bit harder to get the replication and the scale.
Majority of what you have mentioned are fittings. Are there opportunities for structural elements to also be standardized in order to have mass production?
Yeah, we do the walls as well, and obviously you've got beam and block floors around in Kenya at the moment. Our hollow block system, we're doing actually a beam piece as well, so you do the beam out of the same material, so from the outside it looks like the blocks all the way up. And you can see our panel system and our block system up in the display area up there if anybody's curious. And I think, for me as well, the mechanization that you said on site and the cost of some of the machinery, a lot of what we do, and not all of, well, currently all of what we do can be manually handled. And it's designed, it was originally designed I worked in Mukuru before I started the company, so trying to solve the housing problem there, you have to have things that can be carried in small spaces. You can't bring big machines in, you can't, and big trucks and things like that. So it has to be able to be used by people building a small house incrementally, but also building high-rise as well.
Thank you for that clarification. My next question to Ayub Naburi, now that we are talking about manufacturing homes, standardized fittings, and even structural elements. In Kenya, we are stuck with the bias that a house has to be made of quarry stone and concrete. Nyumba ni mawe. Translated to a house has to be of stone. So how can we sell this new technology agenda to them? Do you think as a developing country, are we ready to embrace these new ways of building?
Yes, thank you. First, yes, we are ready to embrace. One of the evidence as why we are saying that we are ready, if you look at our population, 75% is under 35 years. Then secondly, if you look at how we've been swift to adopt the fourth industrial revolution in Africa and in the world, we are among the leading countries, especially in the digital space. So I think it's now up to us as stakeholders in construction industry to push this agenda in terms of construction. Because the fact that we have a young population, they are open to innovations, they are open to technologies. But how do we sell this? One of the ways that I propose we look at is to come up with model projects. We come up with projects that have adopted both maybe a hybrid of the traditional technology and the new technology. A standard model project that is finished and basically mostly or purposely for showcasing, to be like what we normally call a show house. But now it will not be a simple or a single unit, but to be a whole project. And we are having a lot of cities coming up, master plan cities. Can we have these master plan cities, part of them or a section of them having model projects? Secondly, it's about adopting the smart cities concept in this project that we're having. The fact that I know most of us, we've been focusing mostly on using technology to do the main structure. But you ask yourself, to the end user, how does he or she look at this? Okay, what are they keen on? Remember, I'm investing my savings, in fact almost close, some of the mortgages run up to 30 years. Paying a mortgage for 30 years almost, using your entire work life, basically servicing a mortgage. So if I'm to go for this or buy the projects that have embraced new technology, then I need to ask myself, what will be, how smart are they? Okay? And you can look at it from utility management, that has been said. You can look at it from the perspective of mobility and accessibility. Can we just adopt some smart features in the same? Can we adopt the smart features in terms of security, both within a unit and outside that particular unit? Then apart from using smart cities concept, we also need to do a lot of awareness. And awareness, we should not just focus on the big boys, okay? We need to start at the grassroots. The suppliers of materials, those local hardwares. If you sample, say 10 or 20 of them, how many are embracing these technological innovations? So we need to do a lot of sensitization. Then again to the professionals. I know to the design team, this concept is being embraced to a considerable level. But now to the people who are in touch with the market, the valuers, the estate agents, they run with the project throughout its economic life once it's handed over to the end user or to the buyer. Have they been sensitized about this concept? Are they aware? How are they looking at it? Then also in our curriculum, in terms of training, can we purposely work on a training program for our students on issues to do with technology? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayub, for that elaborate response. We have some extra time for some questions, but I do have one of my own to our panelists. Who should trigger the adoption of new technologies in a project? Should it be the client, the lead consultants, the authorities? Should they say this is now in the building code, has to be applied? Or do we wait for foreign manufacturers to come to Kenya and heavily market a new product to us? Do we wait for donations when these building materials come to Kenya and now cheap, and now that's what drives the next uptake of materials? Or do we even wait for millennials to come up and say this is now popular, let's take this up in the construction of new buildings? This question I'd like to throw it out to anyone willing to answer as we now wait for questions from the floor. Thank you.
I think mainly the team generally, the client, the architect and those guys. I certainly don't think we should be importing anything for housing at all. It's all big and heavy, so it seems to be counterproductive of importing environment things to reduce the climate impact of a building. We can do everything. Buildings aren't complicated. We can do it all in Kenya. So that's one of the remits. I mean, I'm obviously not Kenyan, but the rest of the team are, and the whole business is. And everything we do again it has to be based in Kenya. We don't import anything. One of the things we started from the beginning, and I think, importing things from Holland, China, or whatever just seems to defeat the object, in my opinion. But with the social media side, I mean, for us, most of our customers are the young savvy guys who then speak to their parents and tends to be them who bring the parents in. They're really pushing it and pushing the parents to try new things. So I think the youth are really going to make progress. So quite a few savvy oldums is too, one or two of us around, but the youth are really pushing it, and they're the ones that tend to bring the parents to see when they come to see our show house down at Samia. It tends to be the young guys who are the first contact, the young guys, young girls who are doing it. And we've got a lot of young clients. 50% of our clients so far have been female as well, which is good to see.
Yes, Jen.
My comment would be all the above. Everyone you've enlisted there needs to push for this agenda. Then the voice is louder and the adoption becomes faster. Yeah.
All right, I think we can now take questions from the floor.
Yes, we are welcoming questions from the floor. There's a question here. I'll also be sampling questions from online.
Good morning. My name is Michel Harel. It's more of a comment than a question. Helga, you said about using new technology and innovative technology on scale. In Kenya, I will just tell you that in terms of the innovation that we have done and worked with the Kenyan government, particularly with the Ministry of Housing, we entered a project with them in 2012. In that time, we have trained over 25,000 people in the technology that we use. We have built over 400,000 houses, over 100,000 institutional buildings. There are 105 alternative building technology centers in 47 counties. So I think a lot of things that are being said today are actually in place already. We don't need to go and look for it. It's here. It's in Kenya. We spoke about, you spoke about smart city. It's happening. We're busy on a project right now where interlocking blocking system is being used to build the houses. There will be shopping centers, schools, clinics. So this is all already happening. And I just find it, I don't understand how we're all talking about that we need to do this when it is happening. Thank you. This is just my comment.
Thank you for that. There's a hand on that side.
I like what Mr. Ayub and...
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Brian Mundia. I just recently finished my electrical and electronics engineering study, and I'm looking forward to being of value in the real estate industry around the field of electrical engineering. So I do like what Mr. Ayub and also Mr. Holger mentioned, which is Mr. Ayub actually mentioned on encouraging more training, of which one of our audience has mentioned that they're doing. And Mr. Holger also did mention that something interesting, which is moving away from, rather than constructing the buildings, to manufacturing the buildings, which is something I've actually looked into what China is actually doing, raising this fast, the buildings, the high growth buildings, and it's something that I'd like to be able, as the other people of my age set, to be involved in, and that's what I wanted to put there. But as a question, I wanted to ask something. What are the costs? What are the cost difference between the construction, and why and the capital required for manufacture, as well as also there is also another thing. In steel, I do hear that. Okay, I do know that the market industry right now around Kenya, the steel production is not so much, or maybe you can keep me up to date. It's not so much to be able to sustain the growth. Actually, we do import some bits of steel. So how could also that be able to be?
Let me hold you there. Let me hold you there. Thank you so much. There are two questions emerging from there. One is on steel, the other one is on the costs associated with where you talked about manufacturing. And also there's a question online. Does the panel see a role for the National Building Standards / Building Code in supporting the uptake of new building technologies? Maybe you can respond to those ones as the panel.
Before we respond, let me respond to the question on whether we, what we define as innovative technology. In fact, there's way more that we can talk about that hasn't even been applied anywhere in Kenya and might actually be in play in many other parts of the world. And definitely in Kenya, there are items that we have actually applied in the construction industry that hasn't yet become mainstream. So in our context, we're looking at adaptation of these new, what we call new in our context, and innovative materials and building techniques. I'll give an example of this building, KICC, built in 1973. And 1973, between that time and now, almost 50 years. If you compare this building with many other buildings in the Nairobi CBD and throughout East and Central Africa, this looks so innovative, and yet it has been around for 50 years. Many other parts of the world have done such a building probably 100 years ago, all right? So I want to ask us to look at the context of Kenya, and I appreciate what you have actually mentioned. When we look at innovativeness, let's also not just be closed-minded on what it is that has already been done, but let's look at the context of Kenya where we want it to become mainstream, where it's not just us in the room who know about it, but also out there, let the common mwananchi, the common Kenyan, to know that this is new, yes, but it is something that has been done and has been proven. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing that's needed is some assistance for the general public, because I can stand here and say my product's the best, it's the cheapest, and you should use it, and other suppliers do the same. I think the IQS particularly could probably do an impartial comparison, and we'd be happy for that. We've worked with FSD Kenya, and they've actually done that. They're struggling to get it to be enough. They've done it 90%. They just need some extra information to close it. We do okay, thankfully. But I think that's what's needed, because not everybody can do the calculations well. Every supplier will have different ways of presenting it, and doing a like-for-like comparison is very tough. That's what these guys do really well, Jennifer. So, I call out to you. I'm happy to connect you to Sita, who's done a lot of work on that already, if you haven't spoken to her. But I would welcome that. Let's have a table of, the carbon, the embodied carbon of some of these, each one compared equally and done independently. The price done the same, the speed of construction done the same. Doesn't matter what I tell you, let's have it independently. That would be great to have that, and I think it would help everybody to make some of these decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah, you asked a question about cost of manufacturing. Any industrialist will tell you it's the highest in the market. So let me give you a very practical example of manufacturing homes, right, from our experience. So one of the clients we work with has a portable precast plant. The capital investment is 1.2 billion Kenyan shillings. Nothing for the faint-hearted, right? But compare that to a large-scale food manufacturing facility. You're looking at the same figures. Now, the question is, how can you recover, and that's what manufacturing is about, your money fast. And that comes via now output, right? So coming back to the example, the output of that factory is 2,600 units every single year of 45 square meter bungalow size, right? So that means in that sense, you recover your money within 8 years, depending on the calculations behind. So to answer your question, manufacturing is the most expensive in an initial investment stage, but in the long term, because you run the factory for years, you recover the money fast, and you'll be able to supply the market with what's needed.
He also asked a question on steel. I don't know who will take it on. The supply, local production is not meeting supply. How does that play out in the housing space?
I think is not informed. There's enough steel. I know the price has been increasing, but you also have access for importing if you need. Yeah. But on the same point, I want to respond to the speaker there who said they've done a lot of work in this country, which we are calling innovation and all these projects we're talking about. I think when you're quiet, why are you not blowing your trumpet? Why don't we know? Why is it taking 10 years for me in the construction industry to hear that? So that's a challenge to you.
All right, and the question which we picked from online, does the panel, and anyone can take it, not all of you necessarily, does the panel see a role for the National Building Standards / Building Code in supporting the uptake of new technologies in building?
Yes, the National Building Standards has a role. As we talk about sensitization of the public, the developers, the users, and one of the issues that we have, as the QS had mentioned, the reluctance of the developers to take up this technology. So if the National Building Standards can come and assure the developers about safety, about the quality, about the standards, then that can also help in terms of improving the uptake. Yes, thank you.
All right, any other questions? There's a question at the back there.
Hi, my name is Kimani Warui. I'm a contractor, and I wanted to touch on what Ayub was talking about around availability. I think we have available spaces in this country. The problem is accessibility, because I come from Remuru, and I think like 5 kilometers from Remuru, there is a place called Ndeya. That place is very good because of, one, it is hot, but not that hot. So if we can be able to access, if we can be able to have good infrastructure, it can help us, because One, it is hot. Two, being hot, it means that we can be able to use solar system. And another thing is, I wanted to start a project there, but the problem is accessibility. So when you take clients there to see whether they can be able to acquire an affordable houses, they tell you that one, this place is not accessible. So if our government and other people can be able to help us have good infrastructure, I think that can help us on that side. And still, even in Juja still is warm, so it is good for, it is warm and affordable, and we still have rents there, but the problem is accessibility. So if you can work on our roads, internet, because right now, I think we have a portion of people who can be able to work from home. So if you can have internet, water, and electricity, and our roads can be worked on, we can be able to have affordable homes. And actually, if you can be able to do affordable homes from that side, you can be able to create employment to people who will not be able to maybe to come to town and do business here. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not sure who would want to respond to that. Is a response.
Yes, I can respond on the availability versus accessibility of land. If you look at the total land mass in Kenya, we are talking about 583,000 square kilometers, out of which the one being utilized is less than 20%. So 20% of land is used by over 80% of the population. Why? It's available, but there are a number of factors. One of the factors is what he's talking about accessibility, about the location, and about fertility and all that. So, and you also look at that in terms of the trends. In Kenya, we're talking about urbanization. The next few years, almost 50% of the population will be in urban centers. So it's not a matter of just the land being available, but the dwellers, the city dwellers, are keen in terms of also the location of the land. So then that makes the land that is within the city center neighborhood a bit more expensive or more valuable. That's why we're talking about improving the use of land, optimizing the use of land by using technology, so that the guys who want to stay not so far from the city center can still acquire affordable units within their preferred neighborhood. But again, about the issue of infrastructure, that's true. And my argument about the government getting involved in affordable housing, my point is the government should not focus on affordable housing, but focus on infrastructure, so that we allow the private investors to come in and basically operate within that space, but of course with proper infrastructure. Thank you.
You have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the government's role in providing an enabling environment for affordable housing. And to note that the 50 plus bids for affordable housing that were published a while ago, they're all being pushed to the private sector. Build, finance, design, sell, and then give us 10%. There's nowhere the government has said we'll create a road, we'll put a substation. I don't know, I think they are misguided. And maybe we may not need another expressway. We just need an area to have a substation. We want it to be possible. Then now we could talk about development. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any final questions to the panel? Yes, there's a hand here. The second row here, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mine is a concern about the issue of the building technology, building materials. I think Kenyan mortgage financiers are yet to come to terms that we have alternative building materials, because sometimes people want to access mortgages for their houses, but the financiers would say we'd only give mortgage to houses built with maybe building blocks. They've not accepted bricks. They've not accepted interlocking blocks. We are still a long way to go, and that is what makes people shy away from using the alternative building materials to build their homes. And I think that is what has created the stalemate for the alternative building materials. Something that needs to be looked into, because we are a dynamic society. And if we just get stuck to the traditional building materials, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've encountered that. So there's one of the major banks, I won't name them, said we have to prove that our technology can stand up for 40, 50 years before they'll lend to us, and that involved having a building to be 10, 15 years old at least as well. Fortunately, there is another big bank, Equity, I will name, who have approved a loan for our product, and there's a number of others, NCBA, and are pretty innovative in these things as well. So it's coming, and that will then make the more traditional fashioned ones, like the other big one, they'll have to follow. They will have to follow, and it takes pressure from the customers as well. The more people are applying for loans for these things, the more market they will see. So it's coming, and I think it needs the good ones, like particularly I'll shout out Equity, because they were the first ones to approve a loan for our product, and it was good. It was very brave. That was after a lot of setbacks from these conversations. We were at one of these events at Radisson recently, and with all the financiers, and I challenged them. There are customers coming to us for us to provide finance. So that means the finance side is failing somehow, because we're not the finance company. So they've got to make it more accessible, more approachable somehow. But there are some doing it already, and hopefully the others will follow soon.
The financiers are coming, so let's be ready for that. There's a question there.
There is an issue that I raised that was not answered, and I'd like to resurface it. The emerging countries that are actually growing, and they're driving the agenda, what we are actually talking about, technology and innovation. They do raise their youths into the industry. So I think there is actually right now a void, because the universities are churning out graduates, but linking into the industry is an issue. Personally, I'm at that position, and I'd like to be part of driving of championing the technology and also innovation in affordable housing. So how could a solution be made?
I think Simon had mentioned about inclusion of the youth in their projects, yeah, by emphasis.
But the other thing, yeah, you're an electrical and mechanical engineer, I believe. So talk to us. Come to these events and talk to people. We all need good talent, and the majority of the people we employ are, I'm the old guy, most of them are under 30, and we've got a brilliant engineer who's certainly under 30, a great QS who's about 26, both female. And the youth, they come and find us, they hear about us in these events, and they have the same passion you have for affordable housing, and come and find us, come and talk to us. All the other organisations the same. We want talent who get it, not just who want a job. So it's important.
So you're at the right place. There's a lot of opportunity here, so talk to guys, specifically speak to Simon as well. He might be having an opportunity. And just encourage a lot of your peers to also be participating in this kind of engagements. That's the take home I'm getting from there. Any other before we break for lunch? Any question? I'm checking online, there is none on the floor here. Looks like, oh, yes, please. The last one here.
Yes, good morning, Maxime Taz from Onome Mortgage Brokering Company. Just about innovation in the construction technologies, what about the traditional construction styles or as a basis using mud and soil or earth, even modernized with doing earthen bricks? And is it anything that you see of interest?
Brenda?
They're throwing that question to me. Yes, I think there was some disconnect when it came to how material use from the early pre-colonial times in Kenya, where in Nairobi itself, where we had houses segregated for Africans, in the lower Eastlands area was actually made of mud bricks, and they actually tried to transition to stabilized soil blocks. And that looked to be a bit less of a prestigious material compared to what they saw on uptown areas where you had masonry from quarry stones. So in my perspective, I think some of these materials, such as brick, actually have better climatic responsiveness than some of the materials we use currently. They have lower carbon emissions when it comes to not manufacturing, transport to site and actual use. They have less embodied energy, and we are actually trying to push for more of adoption of materials, not just based on perspective, but actually based on the properties of materials. So I am glad you brought that up, because now we're looking back to why human beings, when coming up with settlements, actually chose soil, why they chose thatch, why they chose wattle, timber, right? So thank you so much for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much to our panel for very insightful remarks. Let's give them a round of applause as they resume their seats. Thank you. You may. And thank you to everyone who has raised a question, been part of this. We really appreciate your input. So we want to take our lunch break, and it is being served at the same station we had yesterday. In case you weren't here, sorry about that. Just exit via these doors, take your left, walk towards the VIP lounge. There's a signage, I believe, and then you go to the first floor. That's where we're having lunch. Our ushers should be issuing coupons, I believe. Yes, they have them, so you'll be getting them as you make your way there. Let's be back here by 2 o'clock so that we start the afternoon session, and kicking off will be Mwangi Githaiga, the Managing Director of the Kenya Women's Finance Trust, looking at micro home loans from pilot to scale. So enjoy your lunch. And yes, yesterday I told you to carry your laptops. I was told there's enough security here, so you don't have to trouble yourself. But if you feel that you must carry it, it's still fine.